All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Everybody's exhausted. All right. Was it just me? So many days of conferences, many sessions, many startups. And today, this last session is focused on the first year of a deep tech startup. As we'll see, the first year of a deep tech startup has a lot of variable shapes and forms. Sometimes it's much more than a year. Sometimes even before the startup exists. So to get started, we'll go through a quick round of introductions. So maybe starting with Riam, founder and CEO of Conception X. Actually, that didn't mention here, but it's a doctor, Riam Kanso. And you're a PhD in neuroscience, and now you run an organization in the UK focused on helping scientists and PhDs create startups. So tell us a bit more about how you do it and how the idea came about.
Sure, thank you. So yeah, Conception X has been running for the last 7 years. We started in the UK, but now we've been recruiting from European universities over the last 2 years. What we do is that we find PhD scientists and we work with them to become venture scientists, so helping translate their research into scalable deep tech companies. We have passed about 450 PhD teams through Conception X, and that has resulted in 150 new deep tech startups over the last 7 years of us working with them. So we work across the deep tech spectrum, and the reason I started Conception X is because I faced the same problem when I was a researcher myself, and it's the speed and the scalability to which some of this cutting-edge research can actually make it out there into scalable products and deep techs that can actually grow and become successful companies. So our model is unique. In Europe, we basically keep the PhDs in their PhD. We don't make them stop their PhD. We work with them alongside their PhD to commercialize the IP, which is in their thesis, to build these companies. And this is done with collaboration with their universities who would be on board with this. So we've positioned ourselves as a supporter to the university, to the PhD, to the thesis itself. And the idea would be to see if there's something that can be commercialized first, and then to work with them with this resource to actually build these startups.
Excellent. So Olivier, actually, you also work with early stage companies, but in a more focused sector. So do you want to tell us more about what you do at Genopole?
Yes, so Genopole is a very different organization. We are very old. We are a biotechnology cluster located south of Paris. So basically what we do is we bring together at the same place research labs and research institutions and startups and, well, more or less large corporations. And the idea being everybody sort of mingling together and bringing innovation. So what we've done over the past 15 years is really trying to bridge the gap between researchers and entrepreneurs, and turning researchers into entrepreneurs. So for that, we run different programs, a bit of the same kind that Riam is doing, but we also give them access to an extensive scientific network, more and more extensive by the day entrepreneur network, and we give them access to infrastructure, and we give them access to lab space, and we give them access to different expertise all across the deep tech sector. We're really focused on biotechnology. So initially, for the first 15 years, it was really about medical biotechnology, and especially gene therapy, cell therapy, rare disease in general. And we've expanded over the past 8 years, I would say, to biotechnology for food systems, biotechnology for materials, biotechnology for energy, biotechnology for space, etc. So it's really biotechnology focused, but across very different verticals. And we are trying to basically turn a couple of scientists into great scientists into great entrepreneurs.
Okay, and how many companies do you engage with in a given year?
So in a given year, that's around 65 to 75 companies, okay, depending on the range of the programs and the reach we've got from people outside of the country, for example. But yeah, it's give or take 70, I would say.
And Riam, you mentioned you work with about 100.
Yeah, we get 100 teams each year. They're not all startups at that point, and typically around 40% or so end up becoming startups, and around 15 of those would be raising capital by the end of the year.
So both of you meet a lot of scientists. So I'll also share a bit about what we do at SOSV. So we're a VC focused on deep tech at early stage, typically the first check in deep tech companies. So we work probably a step after what you guys do at Conception X, because we want teams that are kind of already formed, already have a prototype with kind of proven science. And we sign checks of typically, $500,000. And we also have something in common with you guys, because we have our own labs, which is pretty uncommon for VCs. So we have labs in San Francisco and New York to help companies in hard tech and biology as well. So we run programs called IndieBio and Hacks that fund in any given year about 50 to 60 new companies a year. So we also see those venture scientists. I really like that term.
Yeah, we came up with it, actually.
Yeah, it's very good. I think it's really communicates very well in a very positive way that scientists can be founders too. So I think between the three of us, we've seen a lot of different projects, a lot of different struggles, and also a lot of successes. So maybe let's. I don't know if we start with the onions or the roses, but maybe since we're talking about the early years, let's see what do the happy families look like? Do they have something in common? So maybe Olivier, if you want to see across the companies you worked with.
Yes, it's not very space specific. I think that they've shared a lot of common, and the happy families are, in my opinion, a lot of things, but two main things. First, they've really carefully built their core team. And that's the essential thing, right? It's not about necessarily complementary skill. It's more about converging vision that will remain converging. The vision might change, but it has to be really focused on really advancing with the same vision, the same 10 years or the same 15 years or 20-year vision. That's one thing.
How do you see them align on that early on?
We don't see them align on that early on. We make sure that we sort of build that permanence. It's more like we help them build that permanence. It's more like that, right?
You help them formulate that vision and alignment.
Yeah, the first thing we do with them is formulate very specifically and very precisely the vision. And by the way, not only the CEO or the founder or the guy who came with the technology.
It's not about the role.
It's not about the role. It's about the core team sharing that, formulating that vision and sharing that vision. And if the vision has to change for many, many reasons, right? Make sure that everybody is aligned into that change. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I shouldn't say that, but don't fall in love with your technology, and that's it, right? So we're putting a lot of aphasis and resource into turning them into entrepreneurs, building the persona of the entrepreneur, right? So there are a lot of different things. Yes, you've got to talk to your clients, to your customers at a very early stage. Yes, you've got to learn the rope and think about your strategies across different features. But it's really about building a persona, especially in the first, we are talking about first year, but let's say the first year and a half. It's really about building your persona as an entrepreneur. And sometimes that's one of the most difficult things to do. Because
so it's kind of a shift in mindset from the scientist mindset.
Yes, exactly that, because you're in love with what you do. You've been doing that probably for, 15 years, 5 years, 10 years. And this is great, and this is absolute. But it's more than that, right? They've got to sort of internalize the fact that it's much more than that. And what you're doing, you're working on a particular form of enabling your technology or reaching out the real world. And so that's a mental shift, really.
Okay. Do you see something similar, this mindset shift?
Yeah, absolutely. I think speed of iteration is very important. Like a startup will fail if the kind of scientist team will maintain the same mindset that they have when they're writing papers.
So it's a change of pace.
A change of pace, but also talking to people.
Okay. What kind of people?
Well, talking to potential customers. Like, I think the hardest thing we have, because these are, they're quantum physicists, they're molecular biologists, they're like some of the smartest people in the world, like in those domains. But convincing them to go speak to someone before their thing, whatever it is, feels perfect to them is basically a lot of what we have to teach them. And it's a teachable concept. Right?
And
like,
is that something that scientists can relate to as more like an exploratory phase rather than, it has to be perfect, like a publication, and like complete and finished?
Yeah, so, this is the thing that they have to learn, showing things before they are perfect. So we try to help them iterate their original research mindset, which is testing and experimentation with like their experiments, to actually using the same mentality to test and experiment, but with like showing things to clients earlier on, right? So it's the same kind of paradigm. You just need to do it faster with faster learning loops. So if you think that farmers need some kind of robot to, distinguish two types of plants or whatever, you'd better go talk to them before spending a year and a half on a robot that no farmer actually wants to work with. It's
funny you mentioned that, because like what you describe reminds me of what Steve Blank has developed in his methodology of kind of the lean launchpad and the customer development method. And one of the examples of the early launchpad he did at Stanford was a company that was actually doing they were doing automated weeding, and the company was named Autonomo because they were doing mowing and weeding autonomously with a robot. And then the boot camp that he runs basically pushes everybody to do like 100 interviews in like 7 weeks, which is a lot, but after like probably a dozen, you already converge into something. And the Autonomo team realized pretty quickly that nobody was interested in the mowing, and that the solution didn't need to be a robot autonomous, and there could just be an attachment to a tractor.
Yeah.
So they changed the company name, and thanks to the iterations and the feedback they got from customers.
Yeah, but they don't like doing that. So this is what they have to learn, right? Like go out, talk to people, do surveys, etc.
So how do do you see a lot of resistance, or how do you get scientists and technical founders to kind of break through and dare do that? Do you have a way to force them? Like, do you keep their lunch away? Or I don't know.
No, but I think one of the way of doing that is convincing them that they need to talk to a lot of them, to a lot of the prospective customers. And
so with less pressure for every single one.
Yes, okay. But less pressure, but more feedback, more differentiated feedback. And then they start to realize, because they've talked to a lot of people, and a lot of people have said, well, you shouldn't do that for this, but you should, or you shouldn't do the mowing, right? They start to internalize more and more and more the feedback they've got. And that's how
we have a lot of training sessions on exactly this, like how to ask things, when to ask things, which format to ask things in. But the thing about these venture scientists is that they're actually they're very quick to learn. Their learning loops are very quick. So once actually they're convinced that something is worth doing because XYZ examples, they start doing that. It's easier to learn that than to become a quantum physicist, I think.
For sure, yeah. Yeah, so because you mentioned also teaching how to ask the questions. So maybe you're going a bit too much into the weeds here, but it's when you do something, you will generally find a lot of people around you that say, "Oh, sure," encouraging you and giving you a lot of false positives, because basically costs other people nothing to just keep you going, and telling you that what you're doing is wrong is just actually awkward and might damage our relationship. So how do you get them to understand that they have to be careful not to encourage too much positive or false positive feedback?
I mean, these are deep tech products, and they're selling into some very specific sectors. So they're not going, usually, especially with the B2B stuff, they're not going on the street and asking someone, hey, do you think I should create a new type of computer chip? They're talking to the right customers within the organization.
Well, the corporate equivalent is like, oh yeah, let's do a pilot, and you the startup, pay for it, and we just see if it works. And then they go back with some kind of MOU that's technically worth nothing, and
we have a
they get
section
very
on
excited.
that. We have as well.
Olivier.
Yeah, one of the way of partly solving this problem, and you're absolutely right, because when it costs nothing to the guy giving the feedback, then it can be dangerous. One of the way of doing that is, and as an organization we try to do that, is to build an overarching relationship with some. It's easier when it's B2B, by the way, because we try to build relationship with a very large panel of potential customers for the startups we've got, right? So it's still free. The advice is still free, but they're a bit more genuine. They're a bit more genuine. They're a bit more careful with the feedback. And the other thing is, we teach them, as you would say, to absolutely not do what you are saying. The startup is not going to pay for the startup is not going to pay for the pilot. If you want to have skin in the game, you want to have skin in the game. Come on, your corporation, right? So you should do that. We teach them to refuse actually the terms of the exchange.
Okay.
We also connect them to other people who have founded similar companies in the past so that they can learn from previous founders, like what to avoid. That sometimes a few minutes of guidance from someone like that can be extremely helpful.
Let's talk a bit about what, so kind of touched upon that, but what are the biggest risks in the first year or two of a startup? Probably at that time, the product is not going to be ready, so they're probably not going to be killed by competition. It's probably not a big tech that's going to roadkill them either. So what we found in our investments that the biggest risk is not the tech, it's not the business because too early. It can be some investment or sometimes licensing or shareholding or cap table problems, and it's a lot about relationship between founders and how they kind of manage their responsibilities, their titles sometimes, and also their way of communicating. So you talked about the vision, but what kind of other problems come up in the first year or two of a startup and might be the most dangerous?
Team problems. So like if they don't agree, if the core team isn't there, if they don't know how to work together, because the flip side of that is what works really well, which is having a very strong team. And we've seen at Conception X that there's something very powerful about 2 or 3 PhDs or scientists working together. This is not about the number of co-founders. So
not just like a business person plus a CTO?
Yeah. There's something about 2 or 3 scientists who have worked together in the trenches or are in a center for doctoral training. If they band together, maybe with other people, etc. But the teams that have done best and have iterated quickest and have adapted their MVP and have raised capital and have gone on to Series A, they all have in the founding team 2 to 3 scientists, PhDs, working together.
Interesting. I should look into our portfolio to see how that correlates.
It's a very strong statistic, and I think there's something about the new wave of deep techs and people actually being able to understand each other, work with each other. They probably worked together under high pressure situations before, so that works really well.
I mean, I don't want to disparage any organization. We are doing what we can to support entrepreneurs, but I strongly support what you just said, which is, I don't really think the model whereby you bring a technical founder and a business founder, and by the way, who are we talking about when we talk about business people, right? I don't think it works. It works the best. I really strongly what you said, but to get back to your question, it's really also about how do you build your first core team. So you've got 2 co-founders, right, or 3 co-founders, and if they're PhD, that's perfect, right? Okay, but who do you hire first? What's going to be the emphasis, considering you've got limited resources, and you've got to be very careful during that first year and a half, 2 years, whatever. You've got to be very careful on
the first non-founder hire.
The first non-founders hires, and in which order. And don't take 15 R&D people in your first year. Is just what I'm saying, right? Think of the long trail. So it's really about carefully building up the team, I think. And you're right about communication and relationship. It's really about building the culture inside the company and the relationship with the founders, but also with the first.
And so the first hires should also be at that stage people very aligned with the mission, not just just random people looking for a job, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly.
And I guess another one is with deep techs, many times we have people starting with a piece of technology and they don't know exactly which industry it's going to land in. So being smart about talking to the right people and iterating quickly and finding where this technology can land is really important. Like one of our first early exits is a company called Rocco, and they started out, they're quantum machine learning scientists. Initially, when they kind of joined ConceptionX, they thought it was going to be a battery startup. And then within a few months, it actually, they found a place for themselves in pharma, and then they exited to a pharma company, and it was the first quantum machine learning exit. But like sometimes speaking to the right people and iterating so that your product can find the right industry is extremely important as well.
So one thing we observed among some founders, that basically founders are all some kind of on a spectrum in entrepreneurship. There's like more the artist side that really wants to do this one thing, and they don't want to deviate much from it. They have this vision on this one thing. And there's more like the 100% business is like whatever works, whatever I can sell, I'll do that, even if I have to drop the entire thing and switch to something else. And every founder is probably somewhere in between. And I have one in mind, actually, a founder we have from a company in Austria, a female founder who was working on food systems and insect protein. And she was really determined to create machines for consumers to produce their own insect protein. And she had a lot of expertise, and she designed a great machine. So you could have in your kitchen a standalone machine that would produce about 500 grams of mealworm every week. So I see there's already some amateurs already interested. And in theory, that's like the cleanest protein you can find, but the market just wasn't there yet. I don't know if it'll ever be. And we're trying to discuss, okay, how about doing something B2B? I mean, you've done that in the past. Why not? Then maybe this easier. And it took several years until, after much struggle on doing like some additional experiments, she accepted to finally acknowledge that the opportunity in B2B was a lot better. And now she created some kind of automated factory that you attach to, like let's say you have a food production facility. All your food waste from your production, you can give to the mealworms. Actually, I think she also switched a little pivot to black soldier flies. But eventually, that produces B2B protein that she can sell to agriculture and everything. But it took like several years of struggle to the point that we're like, is she going to make it? And now the company
some people
really
wouldn't survive that.
Yeah.
Several years
but
too long.
Do you find that type of resistance? And what do you see happening? Sometimes just the struggle is what makes people realize that actually this thing is working, this thing is not working. I really like that one, but I prefer something that works, and then I'll try the other one. So
yeah, sometimes it works the other way around, right? You were mentioning iteration. That's a bit more than iteration, but I think probably some of the most successful founders or startups we had were the ones able to sort of have some velocity into changing gears like that. Mm-hmm. 5 years ago, everybody was about cellular agriculture, right? So we had a lot of companies working on products on cell ag, and that was brilliant, and everybody was sort of hyped. And a lot of companies came out and said, okay, we want to work on enabling technologies for that, right? Because that's going to be a big thing.
Bioreactors,
media is the great example I had in mind. So we had this company who was working on media, and the vision was really media for cell ag all over the place. And then it took them probably 2 years, but then they switched to media culture for pharma products, right? And the market was there, as opposed to the market that wasn't there yet. And now they're pretty successful and working. But again, they were aligned. They were fairly quick to change gears to that thing. So yeah.
So we talked about some of what makes companies successful, some what makes companies unsuccessful. There's another thing that we didn't discuss, because we think of companies kind of in isolation, but there's also, we say to make a startup successful, you need a village, just like raising a child, but raising a deep tech startup, maybe you need a town or a city or a country actually to make that happen. So in some cases, you can have a very good team, just not with the right resources around them. So how do you solve for that? Is it something you observed? You work with UK-based founders, but also European-based. our model is to bring founders from all around the world to our labs, to give them access to resources on markets. So how do you think about that, about the importance of a location on resources around?
I think, I mean, we take that very seriously. Some of our most important assets are our coaches and mentors, and these are people who've done it before, who can come and teach them. We have the industry partners. We have an industry advisory board of people in, like, you know, the top companies that, you know, our companies would want to work with to actually advise these our teams on whether, you know, their tech has a place in there. We have legal support from, you know, one of the best legal firms in the world. We have fundraising support. We are corralling angels now to start investing very early in these companies before a traditional VC might necessarily be interested in giving them a check. So we're trying to standardize as many things as possible to help them focus on the one most difficult and important thing, which is to actually translate the science into something that works into a scalable product. Because a lot of these things can be fixed so that they can work on these train tracks to actually use their mind on the most important and most difficult thing that there is.
And having this gathering of people also helps somehow take them from maybe a place where they would be like outliers on isolated into a place where what they're doing is more normalized and everybody's doing it and there's more enthusiasm and support.
Yeah, I mean, it's an extremely stressful and difficult thing to do, but when they're all crowded together, it becomes the norms. Then, you know, they start working together on these things.
Do you see that effect at Genopole also, Olivier?
Yeah, I think it's, well, I have a slight issue with geography, but I think it's both, right? So you need to, and we're spending a lot of time doing that, really. I mean, half of the time we spend is with the founders, half of the time we spend is building the whole network that can be called for and very precisely and specifically around them. So we're talking about industry, we're talking about other entrepreneurs, we're talking about. But the other thing is, we want to surround them with the best expertise and skills. And it doesn't have necessarily to be right around us, right? So, I mean, I'm not saying that because you're here, but a lot of the startups we have say, okay, how do we enter indie bio? Because we knew that indie bio process.
So a bio program. Okay.
Yes. No, but I'm not saying that because that's you, right? They know, everybody knows that you're the gold standard of the industry of whatever you want to call what you're doing, right? So, so that's the thing, right? If they need to go to San Francisco or New York because you're there, if they need to talk to people in Stanford or in University College London, we need to be able to do that as well. We need to bring them the best resources we can, the best methodology, the best founders, well, other founders, the best industry. We need to sort of transcend geography in doing that. And that's far easier than it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago. So it's both the village and the global sphere. Again, it's all about bringing the right expertise at the right time and surrounding them with that, no matter where they are.
And also, like, with a lot of these deep tech innovations, I think also being aware of the global trends that are happening and like adapting to those rather than saying, well, why would I build anything in AI? Like, you know, the giants are just going to build everything. So having the right kind of guidance and approach to like have those things in mind and build successful companies around that. For example, one of our alumni, they're Titan ML. Initially, it started out as being, they wanted to put AI on satellites and they were like working on compressing machine learning models to go there. But it was too early for the industry. And then when the big kind of LLM trend came, they used kind of the same approach and the technology to build the kind of enterprise level LLMs focusing on like data sovereignty, which were also compressed and easy to run. So just because a trend like this is coming doesn't mean that everybody should be like, well, what's the point of building? And you have to have the right mindset, the right advice, and the right mentors to actually move with the wave rather, because if they don't, no one is going to build anything. Because you're just going to say that the big guys are going to build everything.
Can I just add something? So to give you another example, it's also about the market, right? So biotech food systems. Where is going to be? Where's the market? Well, most of the times we are thinking in terms of the US, because Europe, regulation, blah, blah, blah. Okay, the US is a bit difficult these days, and the competitive advantage they had as a market might not be the same. So it's Singapore. Once we've said that, well, Singapore as a gateway to Southeast Asia. Once we've said that, how does it work? How can we help? How can we support the effort? Because going to the US, that's fine. We put them into programs, connections, whatever, other entrepreneurs. It's fairly easy. We've sort of mastered that, right? Not as Genopole, but as a community in Europe. Going to Southeast Asia, well, in order to scale up or to build your first customer traction, how do you do that? So we need to work on that as well, which is, yes, we need to enable that geographical market access as well.
So we're talking about the very early years at the point where maybe there's no product yet to sell in the market. So I'd like to go back to probably kind of the elephant in the room when talking about startups is, okay, but where's the money? How do we get the money to get through that first 1 year, 2 years, at a stage where maybe you're still at very early TRL and a lot of investors, even deep tech investors, might be a bit standoffish. So how do you help your super early teams actually navigate this first year or two?
Well, I mean, the very big thing that we did was to do it during the PhD.
Okay, so they don't need to give up on that potential option.
Our whole thing is slowly like repurposing some of the PhD, but aligning with that, because the PhD itself, at the end of the day, it's a product, right? It's 3 years of funding from government to work in a very expensive lab to discover new things. So using those 2-3 years to actually use it for the first 2-3 years of building a startup makes perfect sense.
So rather than basically leaving academia, having 2-3 years in the cold.
This is not a situation. This is not like a Silicon Valley story where people can quit their job to build a startup. They're not building it on a laptop in like a garage.
Yep.
They need the spectrometers, they need the kind of gene analysis thing. So it has to be
like millions of capex just to get something done. Yeah.
So in that sense, a lot of the cost of the startups are being subsidized by this, and the universities are on board because it's essential, it's existential for them to start working on some of these things. So this, this idea of like the capex initially that you need to build a startup, some of it can be used in this way, and then bringing in investors that kind of believe in this and can see the opportunity early. This is the way to do it. I don't think in 10 to 15 years' time we're going to be having any PhDs where you just get money from government to write papers. We just can't do that anymore. So like we're ahead of that, trying to repurpose this, to have people build.
And do you see more buy-in from investors at that earlier stage?
Yeah, it starts with the exited founders who want to who believe in this and who want to support the next level. And then VCs are coming to our events earlier and earlier. We have a great collaboration with XTX Ventures, for example, who get this, they believe in this. We visited their Paris office yesterday. It's lovely, by the way. And, and the idea would be that they would, they see these opportunities, we work together, and they put these pre-seed checks early so that the companies can move forward. So there are new trends. The universities are getting a little bit on board. And of course, it's not easy, but there are ways of doing it that are more, they work, they're a bit more ethical. And if it fails, they're still getting a PhD. Like no one is, leaving a job to,
And so in some labs, I remember visiting some labs in the US in various universities, and in some labs they have like a lot of habits of having back and forth between, research on startups, on industry. And in some others, there's like a huge resistance. And they feel that if a PhD or a postdoc would leave to start a company, it's like almost like a betrayal. There's no coming back from that. So how do you navigate that with the lab heads, the department directors?
At the end of the day, not everyone who does a PhD can become an academic. There's a limited
space software.
No, but is it a better outcome for this academic if the PhD passes through the PhD and then ends up working for like a corporate that has nothing to do with the PhD, or if they use this time to actually spin out a deep tech company from the lab with the university's brand. Like it's because this is not, are they going to become the best scientist in the world, or give up on science to become? They go hand in hand. There's much more in common between being, a leader in your field and building a deep tech startup than if you do a PhD in astrophysics, and then you go and work for, I don't know, Goldman Sachs or something like that. I mean, nothing wrong with working in finance.
I know people like that.
Yeah. But like, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's about the time that you spend doing that. So I think, slowly universities are also being forced to have more impact. We need to spin out more deep tech, and there are ways of doing it that are aligned.
And it's also about, you say it's standoffish, and it's also about what do we need in order to convince investors to be at the stage you were saying, getting interest and getting. So if it's a bit later than it used to be, then that's fine. Let's channel some, probably shouldn't say that like that, but let's channel some public money to give them the means to do that, right? So we are mentioning CapEx, right? At a very early stage, they've got CapEx needs and they don't have any money and nobody will pay for that. So we do that. We channel public money and give them the means to do that. You need bioreactors. We've got bioreactors. Come to us. And
so sharing resources.
Yes, sharing resources is the key, really.
Yeah, it's very similar to the way we set up our labs, is to basically tell them, look, the first year or two, you need some resources, but that you don't need full-time, you don't need to own. So come work with our labs, then go back to wherever you have other access to other resources, but just kind of speed up by being in an environment where everybody's going at a fast pace, when you're not distracted. That's also another advantage of kind of taking people away from their usual surroundings, is that you cut also a lot of distractions and you normalize the kind of the super focused time, and that also helps a lot. So we talked about investors as one source of capital, but very often at the early stage of deep tech startups, there's other sources, sometimes grants, equity-free foundation kind of things, projects that can be financed sometimes by even customers. How much does it matter in the mix? Like I was talking with a company who's doing a computer vision startup for industry, and at kind of the seed stage, I was like, oh, well, you're a reopened company. How about you try to get the EIC grant for like 2.5 million? That would help. And I was like, oh, but I have a lot of customers to serve. This can only be sold on, used on R&D. It's distracting, takes a lot of time. I don't know if I should do it. So how do you deal with kind of the time constraint versus, I suppose, very case by case, but maybe you have some cases in mind where it's worth it?
Yeah, it's a great resource, like not diluting your capital, because it's a long journey. But we have some very successful cases where people have done a combination of both. For example, we have a company called Infinitopes, which is a cancer vaccine company. And they announced their initial raise of 13 million, and half of it was grants, and the other half was VC. So this way you kind of, you extend your journey with that, and it's possible. And I think, but of course you shouldn't apply for a grant if you're forced to do something that has nothing to do with the journey of your startup. So that's the
that's the problem, that's the trade-off. So we're in a geography where public money is available for very early stage things, so that's great. It depends on the constraint that goes with it. So I've got this example of what turned out to be a wonderful company, a directed evolution one we've been working with from the onset, and they ended up being acquired twice, by the way. So, well, they were acquired, and then they were de-acquired, and then they were reacquired by a completely different company. So, success for the founders, success for the team, success for everything. But they almost died before that, because they were looking for a European grant, and I'm not disparaging things, but this was really a nightmare for them to make it work, right? Okay, you've got the grant, that's fine. How does it work? Well, we need that, and then the money is coming. It's sometimes the trade-off is not worth it, is what I'm saying. And my guess is that the highest, we need to be careful about the balance. The higher the grant is, the more the constraint is. So you need to be very careful maybe to not tread into that kind of water sometimes.
We have a founder who crowdfunded once. He was building dementia socks.
Okay. And how did that work?
Yeah, I mean, raise 200K or something.
And
It's
that
like
was, that was enough to get going?
when you can explain the problem to people, like, you know, this is because most people have a relative who has dementia, and like, you know, if this product can help someone in need, it's easier to do. I'm not saying it's standard, but there are ways of getting funding that are not.
Maybe for more like consumer type products, which is a minority in deep tech, right? Okay, so I see we have a few more minutes and then we have time for Q&A, but I see there's already some questions coming in, and I think I'm just going to go through some of that already. One actually we talked about earlier when preparing is about how do you deal with university IP and TTOs? I think it's particularly relevant to you, but probably for you also, Olivier. And we're also facing sometimes companies coming to us with very exciting teams on technologies, but then the IP is a mess, the licensing terms with the TTO is a nightmare, and basically a cap table is like so wrecked that sometimes there's no coming back from it. So how do you view that? Are there best practices? Is everything negotiable? How do you handle those situations?
I mean, there's a lot of gray area in the UK, at least, with PhDs and ownership and deep tech, which means that there's also room for negotiation. So the approach that we have always taken in Conception X was never to say, well, the terms are going to be terrible, let's not do anything, right? So the point is to get to work with the teams to the point that it's quite clear what they're actually asking for the TTOs, from the TTOs, and how much lab space they're going to use, and like who's involved and who's on the patent, and it makes for a much more constructive conversation. But 150 startups means that there have been 150 different ways in which this conversation has
There's
gone.
nothing like a standard at this point.
No.
And just to clarify for those not familiar with the term, so TTO, Technology Transfer Office, typically the licensing part of universities, and some have very friendly terms, say, okay, take your IP, do whatever you want. Others are like, oh, you developed this with us, with our funds, so we own half of it. And generally that's basically a deal breaker for any follow-on investment.
I mean, there's no point then doing
that. That's a deal breaker for the entrepreneurs themselves. I mean, at some point they can be discouraged, right? It's too much. So
some US universities have been, because their model is also very different in the sense that many universities are very supportive of the entrepreneurs because they hope that in the future, if they're very successful, then they come back and sign a big check as a donation or be part of the the endowment. Or so it's kind of they have a longer term view, but I'd say in many other cases the university are very short term. And Olivier.
I mean, I mean the models are really different, but it's really about what's the purpose of this, right? So shoot out to University of California, Berkeley, because they're really good at that, and that's the reason why they get so many startups. You can't expect to make money out of startups. That can't be your business model as a university. Let's really put it this way, right? I mean, I love universities, but if you think you're going to make money because Stanford at Google or something like that, forget about it. So it's really about what's the best. And it has to be founder-friendly. Think about what you're doing. And the fact that you're saying, Riam, that there are different models is the same in France, the same everywhere in Europe. The most successful TTOs or the most successful universities are the ones that let the entrepreneurship fly, really.
And that's also what you observe? Yeah. The more permissive ones are, as an overall result, do better?
I mean, it's just, they go hand in hand. They're more permissive means that more companies can come out. So if you evaluate them by the number of spin-outs, there are more spin-outs. But I think lots of universities are evolving and changing their policies as well, because everybody wants this to happen. It's just,
Having said that, that's very formative for the entrepreneurs, right? Negotiating the IP. So there's a benefit of not it being a standardized model, which is the entrepreneurs have to go negotiate with the TTO.
Okay.
It shouldn't take as much time, but it's very formative for them.
I mean, it's a filtering mechanism. Those that can negotiate good terms are better founders.
Okay. Well, maybe, do you help them with that?
Yes.
Because I remember one thing you mentioned is that once they get some kind of a first check, that's also maybe the time to go to see the TTO, say, okay, we have this
because
investment
it is a
offer
negotiation.
for like in a month, we have, or in 2 weeks, we have to decide. help us make that happen.
Suddenly it becomes very real, and it's not like, come back in 3 weeks. So it's fast.
I'm going to move to some other questions. It's one a little bit unexpected around age bias in deep tech fundraising. And when I read the question first, it's like, oh, okay, investors don't want to finance like some old founders. Actually, it's the opposite. Is that if you're too young or you just finished college, so this questioner, Mr. Calloway, asking, so recently finished undergrad and built everything through sweat equity. Investors are interested until they find out about my age. Is that something you came across? I mean, that's a real situation, right? So,
I don't know, when the question came, I didn't know which way the age bias question.
yes, so too young, or looking too young, maybe.
I mean...
Yes, there is a bias. And yes, we don't care. I mean, granted, we're not investors, so that's easier for us, but we're spending resources on that. We need to work on that. I mean, we specifically try to chase entrepreneurs at a very early age. Maybe we've got this bias, and it works. Sometimes it works. I mean, I've got examples of people that have been funding companies and their PhD was not even finished, right? Sorry about that. But and they were young, and yes, there were reluctance. Yes, it was difficult to have meetings. Yes, it was difficult to... But if they did it the right way, with all ticking... It's not ticking boxes, but you know what I'm saying. With all proving to the external world that they were as able to run as an entrepreneur. And I think the bias comes from the fact that we just assume that you need to be 35 and have a lot of technical and scientific expertise behind you. I think that comes from that. And that's absolutely not true. So yes, there is a bias, but we've brought to life, we've supported the bringing up to life of younger founders. And now it starts to show. So if you've got a track record in a country or in a continent that, yes, young founders can be really good at that, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, in our case, we've backed founders from, I think, 19 to 60. I'd say, so this is an undergrad founder, so it's a little bit different from like master's, PhD founders who are typically a bit older. But at the same time, if you don't back like a young PhD, you don't have the latest science. But if you back somebody who has more industry experience, well, then you have that. So there's kind of pros and cons. So I see time is up. Does that mean we don't have more time for questions, or do we still have time for questions? Okay, well. So that will be the last question. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. And I think we have some time later to catch up. Thank you.